All right, there it is. Yep, we're going.
All right. Hello. So I'm on Mitch's channel, of course. He's the one that's recording this, but we're gonna have a little discussion about politics today. And I guess speaking from my own perspective, I know Mitch, you would be considered more of a liberal, right? So you would kind of hold to the more left-wing side, whereas I would actually hold to a more right-wing side, although I wouldn't consider myself a total conservative because there are some things that I wouldn't hold a conservative position on. But I mean, overall, I guess I could say that I have come from a conservative background, right? And my family's conservative. Most of them are. I'm probably like one of the more left wing persons in my family, but whatever. It doesn't really matter. But
Me too. You know.
yeah. So yeah, that's what we're gonna be discussing today. We're gonna go through as much as we can. We're gonna try to limit it to an hour and a half. Go through most political issues that we can get through and see where we kind of stand on those. So the first thing I guess we can start off with is social issues. So okay, so let's start off with gay marriage. Now, we probably hold the same position on this. I don't think we need to disagree on this. I think that gay marriage should be legal.
Yeah, definitely me too. I mean, I think it should definitely be legal, and I don't know, what your views are on like broader sexual ethics. We might disagree on like whether or not like homosexual acts are immoral or not. I mean, I definitely think they are not. But either way, even if you were to think that, you could still
Yeah.
hold that gay marriage should be legal. So yeah, I think we're probably probably have the same legal view on that one. Yeah, for sure, definitely pro
Okay, so
same-sex marriage.
now Okay, so now we're going to the big. I guess we could start off the big political social issue, which is abortion.
Hmm.
Now, I've read some parts of this,
It's a
right?
good book. I like that book. I
And
have it too, but I don't have easy access to it. So
yeah, yeah. So one of the things that I found interesting was the conclusion about it, and it basically said that like everyone agrees that abortion should be reduced, right? And I think that's the key word, reduced.
hmm
Um, and I think that that's probably the best. I guess that's the kind of middle ground, right? Because what you see typically is you'll have pro-lifers that want to like completely get rid of it totally, and then you have the other extreme, which is some pro-choicers. I'm not saying that you hold this position, but there are some pro-choicers that are, how should you say it? Like they celebrate abortion, right? And
yeah.
I don't think I can't agree with that. Like I don't I don't see why anybody would really agree to celebrate abortion, right? Because there's a distinction between
Right.
wanting it legal and actually celebrating it. And I don't think that celebrating abortion is a good thing at all, right? I don't know what's your view on that, because I mean I know you I don't know if you, I don't know what your position is, but like I get really upset when people celebrate abortion. What do you think?
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, the authors of that book are pro-choice, and I am too. I mean, my philosophical view would be pro-choice broadly,
Yeah,
at least for the first two trimesters. Definitely, I think things get a little bit iffy after the first two. Um, but there are almost always cases of medical necessity. But that's a bigger thing for third trimester abortions. As far as celebrating it, yeah, that's not really a position you see any like philosophers, any pro-choice philosophers defending, because as the book says, the pro-choice writers of that book say we want it reduced, and even if you're pro-choice, you should want to reduce, not necessarily because you think it's wrong, but because normally when you look at what the root causes are of increases in abortions, it's usually like social and economic disparities and
right,
problems in people's lives, and we obviously don't want that. And I mean, even if you don't think abortion's wrong, it's not like it's a good thing. At most, it's just sort of like a moral, neutral
right,
thing. Even if you're pro-choice, you're not going to be like, well, you should have abortions. There's not like any sort of normative positive value to having them. And
right,
and since the causes of them are usually, bad causes, things we don't want people to go through, and there's also a simple, argument to be made that it's a medical procedure. You don't want to have to carry out unnecessary medical procedures when
right,
you could be using the time of medical professionals otherwise. So there's really no reason to want more abortions just simply for the sake of having
right,
abortions. And intrinsically, there's not really anything. So even, yeah, I would agree on that. I want them reduced, not necessarily for the same. I mean, so we can kind of agree. I mean, a lot of pro-choice people and pro-life people can agree on wanting to reduce abortions. Maybe it's for different reasons, but at the end of the day, if we kind of want the same thing. And I don't really think outlawing it is the best way to reduce it. So I guess that kind of gets to my position. I think it's, and I also, and maybe it's easier for me to say because I don't think they're morally wrong, but I don't think outlawing it's the best way to reduce them. I think, having certain other programs in place, and more better prevention methods, better thing, because like 90% of the reasons people cite for getting abortions are economic disparity. So I think kind of taking care of the root causes of yeah.
Taking care
So
of the root causes, I think, is important, right? I guess we can discuss that a little later with the economic issues, but I mean, you're right to point out that there's actually root causes, and I think another important thing to point out is the definition we give for abortion.
Yeah.
So my definition of abortion is basically the intentional killing of a fetus or whatever, right? And that's different than like a necessary medical procedure. Like, let's say if some mother was going to die or something, or some health complication was going to be brought about because of them giving birth, I wouldn't consider those abortions, right? Because it's not intentional, right? If the parent didn't intentionally want to do it, I don't consider that an abortion. Now, of course, you could say, okay, what about if there's like some economic reason, but then they weren't intending to kill the kid, but now they have to because of some like economic or whatever reason. I mean, my position on that is I think at that point, if it's not medical, then perhaps you should give it up for adoption or something.
I think on that, in both cases, I think it's important probably to draw a distinction there between intention and desire. So in the case of like medical necessity, it may be an intentional killing in the sense that the person undergoing it, assuming they're not unconscious, and the doctor carrying it out, they're aware of what they're doing and aware of the consequences, and they still choose to do it. So there is an intentionality there to action, but there's not a desire, right? Like the parent doesn't want this to happen. It's just if they don't, they're both going to die. So I think it was important to draw a distinction there between intention and desire. You can do an intentional action without necessarily desiring the effect, and that's different than say, for example, if a pregnancy was just terminated because of like a car accident. That's obviously not an abortion. And as far as economic reasons, I think we can draw the same distinction. There may be an intention without necessarily a desire, because there are cases, say, of like girls who've grown up Catholic that are really pro-life and then end up getting abortions because they can't handle it at the time. So I think the intention desire distinction in those cases is less strenuous, right? Like obviously it's different than like a third trimester pregnancy like complication. But I think it's still relevant because, I think building intention into the definition is also good, like intentionally killing a fetus or to terminate a pregnancy or something like that. But there are pregnancies there are methods of abortion that more so withhold resources than actively kill. But for most intents and purposes, killing is probably a good way to put it. But I think the intention desire distinction in those cases is sort of important to draw, because you can definitely still be an intentional action even if you don't really want the death of a fetus to occur. So it's probably how I'd look at that one.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting because typically like you'll hear like these really long like threads on Facebook or social media about how you define it, and it's like, okay, well, let's come to some agreement. So like we can all agree that we want to reduce abortion, but at the same time, it's like, okay, what do we mean by abortion, right? And then what are the underlying causes, right? And I do think that perhaps abortion, it also comes back to responsibility, right? So I think that may be another sort of issue where is it really responsible for people to be having sex, if they're not using protective methods, and I mean, you could probably agree with me here, which is that we want to try and educate people on reproduction so that they don't get pregnant or don't have an unplanned pregnancy. And unfortunately, I mean, I'm not saying this applies to all conservatives, but a lot of conservatives are against birth control, which you're really just shooting yourself in the foot at that point, because it's like, okay, well, you're against birth control, but then you want to outlaw abortion. Well, where's
they expect everybody to be like monks, basically. No, I mean, being against birth control, it's just an absurd position any way you slice it, for any reason, right? Like there's just the only people I've seen take that position are some natural law theorists, but it doesn't even follow from like, a basic, teleological ethic. So that's an absurd position for multiple reasons. But once you get to it, where it's just like, you take, and they're against any contraceptives. Usually they're against like condoms, birth control, morning after pills, any of this. Then they're also like, but you can't. It's like, well, all right, I hate to tell you how the world works, but so it's yeah,
Yeah.
that's just a ludicrous position to hold for any reason, and especially when it comes to like the tension between that and being against abortion, it's pretty ridiculous. But you're right that when people talk about these things online, I mean, there's such a drop off between like this is one of those topics where there's some topics online where there's not as much of a drop off, but abortion is one of the ones I've seen where there's such a disparity between like the philosophical literature and the online discourse. There's obviously some exceptions, but most people are just sort of in ideological camps with it. And pro-life people will post all the time about like baby murder, and all the pro-life friends agree with them. And if you are pro-life, that follows from your moral beliefs, sure, but that's not at all something that's going to help like draw pro-choice people into wanting to talk to you about this, right? If you're just like, well, these people are all pro-murdering babies. I see comments like that from people, and I'm like, I'm not even going to engage this comment thread because this person isn't interested in actually having a like discussion about the philosophical. They've already decided their position, and I'm not going to change their mind either way. If you're saying stuff like that, then there's nothing I can do. So I just avoid talking to those people. So so yeah, the discourse around complicated ethical issues definitely has to change, and this is one of those where that's definitely the case.
Yeah. So I guess to close off, okay, so we can both agree that we want to reduce abortion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we also now, of course, I'm assuming you wouldn't be for like third trimester abortions unless it was like some emergency medical situation, right? And I think
probably, yeah.
Okay, we can agree to that then, because of course, I think the Democratic Party they want actually third term abortions, but I'm not sure, like some of them will have different opinions about that. So
yeah, there's a lot of that's a thing that's been going around a lot, that like Joe Biden and the Democratic Party supports abortion up till like the moment of birth. I mean, it's not really true. If you look at like the actual laws they've supported, like Roe v. Wade and what that actually enshrines into law, and again, nobody's having abortions like at the moment of birth, and nobody's even having them really in the third trimester unless they're like have to. So there's some good fact checker apps and fact checker sites that are good to check out for that claim. That's one I've seen floating around all the time, and it popped up on one of my fact checker feeds, and it was like, yeah, this isn't true. So I read up a little bit on that recently, but yeah, I mean, because as that book that you have and I've read a couple times, or I've read it fully once, and I actually have a video summarizing it on my channel. But yeah, as it says, I mean, if you have like a very consciousness-based account of personhood, like that book does, and like what I tend towards, then it's kind of hard to draw the distinction. I mean, you have to. It seems like once fetuses reach the third trimester, that's sort of when consciousness begins, or at least in a morally relevant sense. So it's hard to kind of like make a case for that being okay, I think, unless it's medically necessary. I'm open to reading more on that. I know there's some pro-choice philosophers that have written on it, but for the time being, I'm fine with granting that, like, third trimester abortions are not good unless they have to be done. But so of course I think they should be legal, assuming they have to be done. But yeah, I'm probably fine with that for the time being. That position.
Yeah, and I think from my own perspective, I mean, when it comes to like first term abortions, of course, I'm an idealist, so I take a very consciousness always existed type of view. But
yeah.
But I think again, you have to kind of draw the distinction between will and desire. Right? I don't know. I'm not really sure anybody wills to have an abortion. Right? Now you can have a desire to have an abortion, but you could have like maybe an intention, but of course, ultimately they didn't want that, but they had no choice no matter. And I don't know, because I feel like really what it comes down to is the culture itself. So the reason why people have abortions has deeper underlying issues that go beyond the abortion debate, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So I think I guess we can kind of move on from there.
Yeah, it's a good one to cover generally, but.
So the next one would be, okay, there's really...
Got to pick the broad ones because there are so many, right?
There's a lot. Okay. Gender. I guess we can go to gender identity, and then we'll go to after that we can go to death penalty and But yeah, we'll start with gender identity. So this has to do with like gender athletes and whether or not you should have separate bathrooms or maybe.
Oh yeah,
I'm that position. I mean, you'll hear a lot of conservatives. They'll be like, oh well, Democrats want there to be like infinite amount of genders or something like that, and I don't think. I think there's very few actual Democrats. I mean, of course, there probably are some people that actually believe that, but overall, I'm not sure if the Democratic Party would hold that position. What is their position on that sort of thing? Do they think that there's infinite genders, or is there
not that I'm aware of. I mean, I don't know that the Democratic Party as a party has a specific, like, one sort of view on it. And I'm technically registered as a Democrat, but I definitely diverge. I'm not
uh,
in line with the I'm much more left wing than the Democratic Party is.
yeah,
Probably they're generally relatively socially progressive. So most Democrats are probably pro trans rights, at least nominally. As far as the infinite genders thing, I'm not sure anybody really believes that. Um,
yeah,
and so this is one where the best deference to make is to just the medical community and the philosophical community. So there's some interesting philosophical work done on gender. There's a podcast called Elucidations. I got two podcast plugs for this topic. There's a podcast called Elucidations, where they have a couple interviews with philosophers on gender and gender identity and how they view it, and how, like, and they
yeah,
even talk a little bit about, like, pronouns, how to use those. And then there's a podcast called Science Versus that goes through science, like, what the medical community thinks about various controversial topics. And on this one, they interviewed a doctor who basically said that it's not really a question anymore in the medical community. Like, it's not really debated anymore whether or not trans people are legitimate. Like, it is
yeah,
the case. Like, everybody in the medical community that works on gender and things like that is just it recognizes that it is a real thing, that people do have gender dysphoria, and they are. So it's not really up, and there's a ton of scientific papers on it too. H. Bomber guy has a couple of videos on it, but I mean, it's one of those that's complicated. The most common mistake you'll see people make, conservatives make, is the reduction of gender to biological sex, which is
oh yeah,
it's a pretty uncritical way to look at it. So I mean, we can just gloss over that one. I have a short blog post on it, but just at a purely logical level, you can't do it. Like, it just
oh
doesn't
yeah.
work. Like, the drawing out from it doesn't happen. And
Oh yeah, because there is I think we should make a distinction between biological sex and psychological gender, right? So those are
right,
two different things.
right. And then, gender has, and if you look at like the major sociological institutions, and, like, if you go on their websites and everything, in terms of, they all define gender as part of, like, sociology, not as part of
Right.
biology, and they define it as having to do with masculine and feminine traits, not with chromosomes or biological sex. So I guess
Yeah.
I should say my position on this is sort of my position on this politically is that you should definitely, like, we should be inclusive of, all people in the
Right.
LGBTQ plus community, and including trans people. I think trans people are legitimate, but even if you don't, I don't think there are any good reasons to be against allowing them to, use the bathrooms. I mean, there's
Yeah.
gender neutral bathrooms. There's kind of
Yeah.
a joke.
I think that's
John,
helpful because I
yeah,
know some people will kind of be worried because they're like, well, what if you have like some transgender woman that goes into a girl's bathroom and he or she does something bad? It's like, okay, well, let's have gender neutral bathrooms where they can actually go in there. I think
yeah.
that might solve the problem
There's
with
that
regards.
too. I mean, and there's also, so John Corvino is a philosopher he's got a good video on this too. Because a lot of times, this is actually an interesting critical thinking tool to use for a lot of sociological issues. A lot of times, what people will do is they'll say, like, well, it comes in two ways that they say it. So sometimes it'll just be in the form of a slippery slope fallacy, where they say, well, if we allow X, then that'll lead to Y, which will lead to Z, and we don't want Z, so therefore we can't do X. And
Yeah.
that's an informal fallacy by definition. But also, John Corvino is good at pointing this out. Like, people will take issue with things, but their issue will be with something pretty much that's unrelated to what they're arguing against. So in the issue of, like, allowing trans people to use the bathrooms that conform to their gender that they are born with, or they've decided, um, they'll say, like, oh, well, we can't have that because then we'll have, like, pedophiles that'll, and then
Yeah. Right.
Corvino is good at pointing out the ethical distinction there of, like, well, your problem then is with pedophilia, which we can all be against, but
Right.
that's not an intrinsic feature of, I mean, there's not really any reason to think that trans people on average are more pedophilic. And in fact, I mean, you think there aren't male pedophiles that prey on male children? I mean, so and vice versa, and also, or not vice versa, but with females as well. And so, yeah, I mean, and John Covino has this kind of humorous quip about, you have a gender neutral bathrooms, you've been using one your whole life, it's in your house. So
Yeah.
there's the issue with that, but even in terms of allowing trans people to use the bathrooms that conform to their chosen gender identity, or, I use chosen there loosely, because that's still, kind of up for debate, I guess. Yeah, so the interesting critical thinking tool for ethics is separating what your problem actually is. Like, if your problem is with pedophilia, that's great. We can all be against that. There are ways to prevent that. But your problem isn't with trans people, and there's no reason to think that trans people are disproportionately going to be sexually abusive, and so on and so forth. So you have to kind of distinguish what the actual problems are. So I definitely think, and I think that one of the biggest things that people have to, it's just kind of a general point about empathy. Like, you have to understand that you don't really know everything about people's lives. Like, it's easy for cis straight white people to be like, oh, gender, that's a fake, you're just pretending to be a girl. I've never lived through what that's actually like, experience of being trans. So I think part of it is just listening listening to people's report of their lived experience and being empathetic about how you might not understand that. And so kind of forming some of your views on social issues based on, it's the same thing with racial issues, right? Like racism, like you should listen to what minorities say about how they feel oppressed, and you should take that into account. It's the same thing with trans people. I think a lot of the issues with sports are really not really in, like, very, very like relevant ethical issues. A lot of times people just bring them up kind of as like red herrings to sort of like be like reductios almost, and try to kind of criticize the view by making it sound absurd. Like, oh, you think trans people are legitimate? Well, do you think I can just say I'm a girl for a day and do a bodybuilding competition? And it's not really a good faith argument. It's not really something worth engaging with. And I don't really have a settled view on it strongly either way. I don't really care as long as we're, treating people the way they want to be treated. So I don't think it's really ethically that interesting. The other ones are things about, because when you have, it's the same thing, like, when you have places that have handicap access or not, like whether or not people that are disparaged feel like the world is such a way that they can live as themselves, that has psychological effects. So I think making the world in such a way that people can feel comfortable living as who they say they are, that's important. So that's morally important, I think. And there are some things you'll notice a lot when it comes to issues of trans rights. People say, well, I identify as a helicopter. That's okay. Again, that's just a horrible faith argument. It's not even morally interesting. And a lot of times it's just absurd logically. So it's a tough one to talk about because most people are not really interested in actually digging into it. So I think the best thing to do to this one is to defer definitely to the scientific community and the philosophical community, which their general consensus, especially in science, is pro-trans rights as well. So I don't know if that settles my view on it, or if you have anything else we want to talk about that more specifically, but that's kind of generally how I like to think about it.
No, actually, I actually would agree with your view, like when you really think about it in that sort of way, right? Because especially when you brought up pedophilia, right? And so that'll typically they'll say, oh, well, is the LGBT communities, are they going to include pedophiles now? And it's like, no, they're not. So yeah.
Yeah, no, nobody's in favor of that, at least as far as I'm aware. I wouldn't be, and I don't. Yeah, that'd be an absurd position. So yeah, no, that's not really an issue for trans rights or anything, or gay rights or what have you. Because people did the same thing with gay rights. They had talked about pedophilia and tried a lot of propaganda when there's the prospect of social change. So sifting through it is important. But yeah.
All right. Well, the next one we could talk about within social issues, we can just briefly talk about this, which is the death penalty. Now, the death penalty, my position, I wouldn't actually support it in all cases. So I would say that the death penalty should only be used in very special circumstances. So basically, if someone were to go into a house and kill somebody, well, that's not used for death penalty. But if someone were to go into a house, torture, rape, and murder somebody, then I think that's death penalty, because there's a lot more evidence you can use. So it kind of deals with that sort of objection here. And I just think that it brings justice to someone, right? Now, of course, we can talk about justice later, because I actually don't like retributive justice at all. But yeah, but when it comes to death penalty, I'm open to it, but only in very special circumstances. And so that's kind of my view.
Yeah.
What's your view?
Oh, I'll start. I'm also definitely a fan of rehabilitative justice more than anything. This is a tough one. Actually, this is one of those where like I have thoughts on it and I've seen a little bit of stuff, but I've not like surveyed. And I'm hesitant. I've gotten to the point now where I'm hesitant to take positions on things unless I've read some sort of philosophical paper on them or book. And I've not read a ton on this one, but I'll just say at the outset. So, a couple things taken into account. It's not effective as a deterrent. I mean, all the data is against it being effective as a deterrent. It doesn't deter crime. Just massive studies done on this. Most criminologists and sociologists that have worked on it are like, yeah, no, it does not deter. So I think those arguments for the effect of it are pretty bad. As far as for really egregious crimes, there's the issue of how many wrongful convictions there have been, and then there's a couple reasons to be against it. Full stop. I think there's kind of, because there's recently been kind of the projects where they've gone back and redone some DNA testing. Now we have DNA testing from evidence and exonerated a lot of people, and some of which have been on death row. So I think there is an issue of, there is the justice system beyond a reasonable doubt, but it's never really beyond a reasonable doubt. So there's always the possibility that you're executing, and they found people that they have executed that they've later found were innocent, and they executed them. So I think there's kind of like a risk-based, there's kind of like this sort of philosophical, when you think about in philosophy cases, like if you were going to do some action that it had even a extremely small chance of killing an innocent person, or you just refrained from it and there weren't really any negative effects. Because I mean, making somebody live in prison for their entire lives is probably worse for them than dying, and it's not like they're harming society anymore because they're incarcerated. So you're not really taking any risks by keeping them incarcerated forever, and if you execute them, you are taking a risk, even if extremely small, that you are killing an innocent person. So I think philosophically it's hard to make the case that we want to, we would take the risk of killing an innocent person simply for not really any reason at all, unless we can give some case where like we must morally have to respond to certain offenses in this way, which I'm not quite sure we can. But there's also, maybe you'd call it like a philosophically anarchist view of just like not wanting to even give the state that much power over individual lives, no matter what crimes they commit. So I'm not sure if I necessarily accept that view. I mean, I'm generally sympathetic to social contracts. So if part of a social contract is, certain levels of violation of said contract entail death, maybe there's a case to be made there. But I definitely think I think it was Casper Hare that recently had some interesting variants on the trolley problem, where like with unforeseen consequences, and Dustin Crum and I talked about that in relation to the gun control debate. I think there are similar cases to be made of like, okay, if you're going to do an action and and as a result of your action there's like a 1 in 100 chance an innocent person will die, or you can just refrain from doing that action. You want to take the chance, even if there's a 99% chance you're killing a guilty person? Do we really want to risk the fact that you could not be, because we've seen it happen before? So I guess that's one reason I would probably in general. And also, there are some crimes that are so egregious we'd want them to death penalty response to them, but some of those would be committed by people who are psychopaths, who due to their brain chemistry only have so much control over their actions. And of course we shouldn't let them go free. We should still prevent them from harming society and other people further. But as far as like killing being a response, there are sometimes there's heat of the moment, manslaughter, there are accidental killings. So I guess I'm broadly speaking, my tentative view is that I'm against the death penalty for a couple of the reasons I've said there. But I will say that with the caveat that I've not read much of the literature back and forth on this. I think most of the applied ethicists I like are probably against it. And most of the applied ethicists I probably don't like are probably for it. So I'll have to survey some of that literature more. But I guess tentatively I would say I'm probably against it, just because there's not really, if there was strong evidence that it was a deterrent of violent crime, that would maybe make things different. Because if we could give a reason, like some value that's going to result of this, that outweighs the risk, maybe. But if the execution is really there's not really any valuable effect such that the action is worth risking, and the only reason we're doing it is because of some sense, as you said, just pure retribution, this person did this thing that deserved to be punished, full stop, even though there's not really any justice. I mean, there's not really any progress being made there. It's just so I'm not sure that's a great case, but I don't know. That's my tentative thoughts on it, I guess.
Yeah, because my own perspective is I've actually, because I used to be for it completely, but now I had to modify my position a little bit because you do have those cases where you can kill someone that's innocent, right? And
Hmm.
so you have to be careful, right? Because you don't want to do that. And I mean, I talked to some people about this, and one lawyer told me that it costs more money to have someone be on death row than it is to put them in life in prison, which is
Hmm.
interesting because typically you say, oh, well, how is that more expensive? Well, because they have to go through lawsuits, well, not lawsuits, but yeah, there's like a big court process they have to go through. Before someone get executed, there's like a lot of steps that go into play, and that costs taxpayers more money overall than if they were to just put them in life in prison.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is
There's a simple economic reason to be against it too. Even if you don't have any
yeah,
moral qualms, you can just be like, well, it's cheaper.
yeah,
So that's possible too. And I guess there's always with some people, not necessarily like say the psychopath cases, but the lesser ones, there's always maybe the potential for rehabilitation. So if
yeah,
somebody could, because there have been people that have done like maybe lesser crimes that have been rehabilitated in prison. They've ended up being authors or like getting degrees or having. Generally, there's always the potential that they have value left in their life, either to produce for themselves or
right.
for other people. So depriving them of that possibility simply because you think they deserve to be killed. And so that's the thing too, is we don't know the future. So kind of again letting the state play God with people's lives, and we don't know what their lives are going to end up being like, is sort of a risky position, I feel like. But that's kind of knee
All right.
jerk. So
Well, I guess that'll conclude the social issues because I'm pretty sure everything else on the list is we'll probably agree to that anyways. So
we've
we'll
got all
go
the big
to
ones, right?
yeah. So go to domestic policy now. I guess we can start off with gun control.
Hmm.
Now I know you've had a discussion with what's his name again? I forgot.
Dustin Crummett,
Dustin.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Dr. Dustin
I mean,
Crummett.
of
Sorry,
course,
Dustin. I had a minute.
my position is, well, I support the First Amendment. I think that people should have the right to own a gun, but I do think that there should be background checks and that sort of thing going on.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm not sure how much. I'm still undecided, like how much they should be restricted. So, like, of course, I don't think that people should own RPGs. I don't think people should
Good, yeah,
own
good.
grenades. No explosives at all. I wouldn't support that. But when it comes to like other guns, like um, what's it called? Oh yeah, assault rifles. That's fine. When it comes, handguns, shotguns, those are fine by me. And then I would also support them having what's it called? Attachments because
Oh
attachments
yeah,
they actually so
accessories.
attachments they actually help people control the gun better. So like if you're shooting it, then it's much more easier to control, and so I would actually support that sort of thing as well. So I do. I mean, I do take a more conservative position on that. But I don't know what's your thoughts.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to yours actually in some ways. Maybe not exactly, probably not exactly the same, but I've changed my mind on this pretty recently, like just this year, and it was probably only actually a few months ago that I really did. I I went through a phase where I was just a hardcore, libertarian about these things. So I was pro like
Yeah,
everything. I was like, you should have tanks and bombs, and which is obviously absurd.
yeah,
But I had that phase, so I've kind of gradually I've come from there to being now I would call myself, I guess, generally pro gun control, which, as you mentioned there, it's important to kind of distinguish what that means. Like if you read, it's a really good paper on this. It's introductory by Hugh LaFollette, because there are at least three different kinds of what we call gun control. I mean, there's total gun bans, but a lot of people that are pro gun control aren't for that. And there's like increased background checks. There's making it only accessible to certain parts of the population. Then there's actually completely banning it. So I'm definitely, I guess my position, which I'm still trying to sort out, like exactly where I think like the dividing line should be. I guess my general position is that I'm for gun control in the sense that I think we should have more background checks, and I think there's definitely types of weapons that should be restricted. I guess what I'm undecided on is where I think the cutoff line of like what weapons. Generally,
right.
like bolt action rifles, shotguns, most handguns. I'm probably fine with people owning those. Probably. I don't know. I'm kind of undecided about more like high capacity rifles with like higher magazines. And I think a lot of the arguments for a lot of the arguments for guns you hear online and like in public forums are really bad, like the hunting or the self-defense. The worst, one of the worst one, the most popular one that's probably the worst is the, we need it to fight the government. So I definitely would recommend Dustin's paper on this. He and I talked about it for about 45 minutes to an hour in that video I did with him, but his paper that we drew from that conversation is very good, and he makes use of that the Casper Hare argument that with the kind of all the trolley problems, he uses that if we can do things that I'm gonna botch it if I try to explain it, but basically the idea is that he uses these trolley cases to point out that I should do the action that I think has the greatest likelihood of saving the most people. It's a really, like, the way he uses the trolley cases to argue for gun control is like brilliant. I love that paper. But I think it's also important to distinguish, like, when people talk about rights to own guns, we have to, when we're talking about rights, there are fundamental rights, there are derivative rights, there are others, but those are the two basic kinds. And I definitely don't think, I think some people have this view that they think the Second Amendment supports, but at the end of the day, a lot of times also the argument is, well, the Constitution supports it. And it's like, well, who cares?
Yeah.
The Constitution, when it was first written, supported a lot of shit that we wouldn't want now. And it's also just wasn't a democratically, done document. So I don't really care what it says. But also, so I definitely don't think there's a case to be made that gun ownership is a fundamental right, the same way like right to life is. Now, maybe it's a derivative right. Maybe derived from your right to life, you have this right to self-defense, which entails you can use guns. You can own guns. Maybe there's a case to be made there, but I think even if there is, it's hard to make that case for one thing, because a lot of instances of self-defense you could use non-lethal tactics.
Right.
And I think so. On average, I think gun control is a good thing on par. I mean, if you look at how also it affects suicide rates and in other countries and how many less gun homicides they have, a general consequentialist level, I think it's pretty uncontroversial to say that at purely level of analyzing the consequences, it's a good thing. The debate is between whether or not there's some like fundamental violation of rights going on when you impact gun control. So I'm definitely pro gun control, like some gun control measures, I should put it that way. I'm not pro the government coming to your house and taking all your guns. I'm not one of, so, and that's not really a majority view either. Again, if you read the actual philosophy literature, it's not a super popular position. I don't even know if it's one that's ever argued for. It's just kind of this right-wing caricature online of what gun control is, who've never read anything about it. So yeah, I guess I'm pro gun control measures. Which ones exactly? I have a broad idea, but I don't have like a super specific criteria at which I draw the line, I guess. Maybe I should, and it's something as I said, I've changed my mind on this recently, so I'm kind of working out my specific view on it ongoing, but those are my general thoughts on it, I guess.
Okay. Well, I think we would probably hold a very similar view. So yeah, I guess the next one could be drug policy. Now, that one's interesting because I think we should make a distinction between legalizing drugs and decriminalizing drugs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think all drugs should be decriminalized, which means basically that you should not throw people in prison for having drugs.
Right.
That's my position.
Agreed.
Basically. Oh yeah, you agree? Okay, then I don't think we don't need to. I guess.
Yeah. As far as legalizing, I mean, I definitely think some like marijuana should obviously be legalized. I think that's for sure. I definitely think all drugs should be decriminalized. I'm open to the view that they should all be legalized, but I don't know that. I mean, I guess I would just say that's sort of an open issue, but I'm happy as long as we decriminalize all of them. The fact that we have so many people in prison over possession of marijuana is just absurd. So, yeah, definitely in favor of decriminalizing everything and maybe legalizing too. But because I mean, there is a case to be made economically for things like marijuana, like the tax revenue it could create by selling it legitimately as opposed to non-legitimately.
And I also want to point out that we lost the drug war, right? So that's
the drugs are winning the war on drugs,
Yeah. So that's another, I guess, good reason to decriminalize it.
Because you think about also one of if you're talking about the consequences, for one thing, it is this expensive and ongoing drug war, but also a lot of the problem with like drug cartels comes from violence and warring. So if you even gang, I guess that'd be more like if in South America, but even here like gang violence, if if you legalize it, you can eliminate some of that violence that results as far as drug
Right.
like the drug trade goes, because you have it now done in legitimate systems where there's kind of laws and regulations of how to be done. Because that's the thing too, is we'll talk a little about economics and regulations more, but if you have like regulations on how drugs are sold and stored and all this, then you're going to have less cases of people overdosing. You're not going to get things laced as much.
Right.
So you're going to eliminate kind of some of the, you're going to at least reduce the potential for like negative consequences on individuals who are drug users, but you're also going to probably reduce gang violence because you're going to have, clear regulated. Imagine if you had, instead of having to go to some dude on the side of a street, you could go to like a medical professional who can give you like a diagnosis and like a dosage and like test things to be like, make sure it's clean. I mean, people are going to do drugs, so why not make it safe? It's kind of similar with abortion. When Texas had a bunch of their like really pro-life laws that happened, people were getting they had a bunch of abortions, but they were all like underground and like not medically safe. And so, same thing with drugs. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I know we already talked about abortion earlier, but I actually had to change my position on abortion because I realized that people are going to still do abortions, right? And I think a better approach to take it by is through a medical approach rather than like a forced legal approach. Right.
Yeah. So, well, kudos to you for changing your mind on that. I mean, people like to draw this distinction is important. Like, even if people are still going to do something, there is still value in, having legal restrictions against it, because we should still morally restrict things. And sometimes laws do reduce, crimes when they exist. Like, probably more. Maybe it might be true that more people would do drugs, but I think in the case of drugs, it's not morally wrong necessarily. And it's kind of this similar ethic to when parents like tell their kids, like, if you want to try X, do it at home with us instead of like out at a party with your friends where you could overdose. It's sort of like that, which of course I know if any libertarians are watching, they're going to hate me comparing the government to parents. It's just an analogy, But because I don't agree with that, if we're taking it too literally. But I mean, there is something to be said for the fact that like if people are going to get involved with an activity that's potentially dangerous, having it mitigated by a team of medical professionals and medical organizations is better than it done by these underground organizations of non-medical professionals. So I don't really think there's any good case to be made against decriminalizing drugs, and probably not even legally. So
I would agree with that. So
cool. Yeah, hey, we're doing good here in terms of agreement so far.
All right. So now I guess we can go, because there's on domestic policy issues, those are the only big topics. Everything else is not really big relevant. So we go to healthcare issues. So healthcare, okay, so that one's probably going to be the most complex one, right? Now,
yeah, that's a tough one. It's complicated. There's a lot to say about it.
So that one, okay, so let me speak for my own, I guess, how I kind of changed my view over the years. So at first, when Obamacare came out, I was against it, of course. However, I realized that there's a reason why, like, laws don't pass just because, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why it occurred, and that's because I think the healthcare system. I'm sorry, but I don't care if you're left wing. I don't care if you're right wing. I don't care if you're a libertarian. I don't care if you're a communist, right? I think we can all agree that the healthcare system in the United States is horrible right now.
Yep.
Really bad. Too expensive. It's just. I mean, we're dealing with life and death. Like, it's not like some other it's not like some arbitrary issue that you can just brush off, right? Mm-hmm. It's something that is real, like it deals with life and death itself. And that's why I had to, I guess, concede that point that I think we should have some type of free healthcare, especially for those that can't afford it, right? And then, of course, I'm undecided on whether we should have like a single payer healthcare system. There have been some interesting arguments made that it'll actually reduce the cost overall if we made it free. Mm-hmm. And so honestly, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't know. It's kind of hard for me to tell where I stand on this, because I would agree that like healthcare is it's very important. The hospital costs are too much for people. And there's just, I don't know, there just has to be a solution that can work for everybody. What's your perspective? Because I mean, honestly, like I'm open-minded to the whole single-payer healthcare system, but the other thing I'm worried because it's like, well, if we do that, is it going to really make people better, or like, I don't want to go to a hospital and have to wait like 3 days to go into an emergency medical center, right?
Hmm.
So I don't know because I'm not sure if government healthcare is an efficient healthcare system, right? So that's the kind of worry that a lot of conservatives have, which is why
Right.
a lot of conservatives want like this free market healthcare system. But then if they go that route, well, then healthcare is going to be more expensive, right? So
Right.
it's like it's really hard to navigate what's the solution, right?
Yeah.
What's your perspective on that? Because I don't know what the solution is, honestly.
Yeah. Well, it's not, you're open to the, generally. Yeah. So there actually was a study done. I'll try to find the article and send it to you if you want to like put it in the show notes or whatever. But there was when Bernie was proposing earlier this year, his plan, there was a thing that came out that economists were like, yeah, this plan would save overall like billions of dollars. So there's that element to it too. I'm not as concerned with that, in terms of because when you talk about money and funding things, I mean, we have enough money to do it, even if it wasn't going to reduce the cost. I mean, in terms of how
Right?
much our military budget is just obscene. I mean, it would take a sliver of that to
Yeah.
a sliver of our military budget or a sliver of actually taxing Jeff Bezos. So paying for it's really not a huge problem. Conservatives like to make it sound like it is. And they also like to use the arguments of like, well, government's just always inefficient. So if you give the government control of healthcare, it's just going to be an inefficient system, which some government programs are inefficient and some are efficient. It's not like an all across the board. You have to do a case by case analysis of what the policy proposal actually is. And when you look at every other industrialized country in the world, they have some form of universal healthcare. I guess there's also a distinction between like more short term and long term solutions. For short term, like I think one of Biden's proposed plans, which I'm not a fan of Biden, trust me, but
Yeah.
he's proposed. I think the general idea of having universal health care, but then having private options still kind of
Right.
eliminates a lot of the conservative worries. 'Cause, like, look, if you want to pay for a private institution to do your health care, then you can. But people that can't afford that, they also have an option. So that's fine,
Right.
I think. I
Yeah.
would ideally like it all to be universal, but that's an okay stepping stone. Um, so again, I'll plug this podcast. Science Versus did an analysis of the United States versus England's healthcare system, and England's was overall better. There are pluses and minuses. Like the U.S. does some things better than England, but on average, for the average person, England's was better. And England is actually one of the not as good healthcare systems in Europe. I mean, it's kind of similar to
Right.
Canada. Canada might be a little bit better, and like the Nordic countries have like the best, like Denmark, Norway, Sweden. Um, but so in terms of people talk about waiting lines, I mean, there are waiting lines here too. Sometimes they're just endless because if you can't pay, you can't go at all, or you're going to be in crushing debt. And usually when you look at the other countries, and we've gotten a taste of, what the free market does to healthcare in terms of the pharmaceutical industry and how much
Oh yeah.
insulin costs. Yeah,
It's too
that's how the
much.
free market handles healthcare, is it jacks up prices. It's because, markets are all about profit. So obviously, if you turn any institution over to the market, what it's going to gravitate towards is trying to profit off of that business, and that's
Right.
not how we want to handle things like people's lives. We don't want to break it
Or
down
like,
to a
right.
profit institution.
I don't know if this analogy works, but another analogy I thought was kind of helpful was electricity or like any water system. So when you get water into your house, like obviously everybody needs water, right? Everybody needs something, right? And so when you have a product that everybody needs, well, I'm not sure if a free market system would work in that situation,
Yeah,
right?
that's a good way to put it too, because a lot of times the way markets are defined and characterized as means of allocating scarce resources. Well, we don't want something like healthcare to be a scarce resource, and it's not if we handle it properly. It's only a scarce
Right.
resource if we choose to make it scarce. Um, so I definitely think a universal system, and I think definitely you can definitely make the case that the right to healthcare is at least a derivative human right, assuming we
Right.
have rights. We can speak at least nominally of rights as some sort of ethical obligations we owe each other, um, because it sort of falls directly out of a right to life. If you have the right to life, then you have the right to have a medical procedure done that can save your life. You shouldn't be forced to just die if you can't pay to have, like some sort of surgery done. So as far as, the arguments that it's inefficient aren't good because every country in the world has it. And largely speaking, generally when you look at the systems people like to critique, like the waiting lines, usually though, again, that podcast goes to the science of this. The waiting lines are for not like non-emergency, procedures and things, things like checkups, things that aren't really like essential. But for things that are essential, those are moved to the top of in terms of prioritized. So it's not like people are dying just en masse because they can't get into hospitals.
Right.
The cases that are severe are prioritized in the universal system. So it's one of those things where we should definitely, I think it's pretty undeniably true that we should have some form of universal health care. There are right ways to do it and there are wrong ways to do it. And the best way to figure out what the right and wrong ways are is to look at what works globally and kind of go from there. Look at what doesn't work and kind of construct a system from there. It all comes down to how we choose to allocate resources. As I said, if we take part of the military budget and instead spend that on making sure people can live, we can do that. So if we make the right choices and we, construct systems efficiently, again, listening to experts on how they think we should construct these things. But yeah, it sounds like we probably broadly, you sound at least broadly sympathetic to a universal system.
Yeah,
And as I said,
I'm going to be honest with you. I had to change my mind because, like, when you really think about it, it's like there has to be, like, you can't have healthcare the way it is right now. Like, it's just,
no, it's horrible.
It's just going to cost too much. So unfortunately, I don't know what the solution is, but I think somewhere along what you said would be, I guess, a good, starting place.
I think that the solution is definitely a public option, at least for the short time being, like giving everyone a public option. If that means we include private options for a while, for the time being, fine. But as long as everyone has access to decent health care, that's what we have to get. The end goal is we have to make sure everybody has health care. Exactly how we do that, maybe there can be some flexibility there, and we can talk about that. But I think it's pretty clear the way to get everybody health care is not to leave it to the market. Anybody who thinks that's just a really naive way to view the world, because that's kind of, we've been experimenting with that, and it's horrible. We have like one of the worst healthcare systems in the world. So,
well, yeah, because if you look at electricity, like that's not really in the free market, right? Because everybody needs electricity, so you can apply it to that sort of thing. So, okay, so I guess healthcare. I guess we can move on.
It's a good one to cover, yeah.
Yeah. So now, okay, so this is interesting. So, economic issues, taxes, government spending, corporate tax. There's a lot. We can go over a lot on here.
If anybody's watching is familiar with my channel already, they'll know my position on most of these things. I've talked about a lot of this, and actually have an interview coming out probably sometime next week for Emerson Green's podcast, Walden Pod. We talked for like 2.5 hours about socialism. So we talk about this stuff a lot. And just everybody knows my general positions. I'm a democratic socialist. You can probably guess most of how I think about these things. But yeah, which one do you want to start with?
Okay, so I guess we can start with, there's again, economics is really huge. It's going to depend on your ideology, what you think, but I guess we can start with taxes more generally. So we got the flat tax idea, we got property tax, we got all of these different types sort of taxes. So this is my position. So I'm open-minded to this idea of a marginal tax, and this is something that Alexander Ocasio-Cortez, her idea is basically that you tax. So basically, if you make above like $10 million, then anything above that you tax by 70%. I'm open to that idea, although there are some interesting, some conservative arguments against that. Like they'll argue that if that were to be implemented, then I guess you wouldn't. It wouldn't really work because there's like loopholes in the system, or you would have to apply it to everybody, which I'm not convinced of those arguments because you just have to close the loopholes.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, you can't view policies like that in a vacuum, right?
So I'm open-minded to that. And then as far as like corporate tax, of course, I think that corporate tax should be high. Now, when it comes to property tax, I don't think there should be property tax, at least when you own the home. Now, of course, the reason why for that is because I think once you actually own the house, I don't think you should. I don't really see why you need to pay taxes on that. I mean, we don't pay tax. Like when you buy an item, for example, like you pay taxes once, but then that's it. I don't know why. What's your
Right.
position on that property tax? Because
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad I don't have to go through the we don't have to go through the taxation as theft stuff again, because we're at least both past that already. I've had to talk
right,
about that one a few times, and it gets. I'm sympathetic though, because I used to be there, so I'm like, I should probably talk about this because I needed somebody to talk to me about it at one point. I guess so. As far as property tax, I'm generally I probably agree that as long as if we did our taxes properly across the board and we didn't need to, then yeah, I do think. But I also, there's differences with it. Like if I were to buy a house or you were to buy a house, I don't necessarily think that should be taxed perpetually. But if Jeff Bezos were to buy a 10,000
yeah,
acre spot of mountain land, then that should probably be taxed. But I don't think people should have that much money in the first place.
yeah,
So as far as property taxes, small scale especially, I think that's probably fine. I mean, maybe there could be something kind of similar to a marginal, like if it's a certain amount of land, or depending on what it's going to be used for, maybe like a case by case basis with property taxes. But in general, yeah, I'm fine with saying like, yeah, once you buy your house, you own it, and that's fine. As far as broader views on taxation, obviously I'm against. I'm obviously. Well, I am against corporations, just full stop. So I am definitely for taxing them highly. Of course, being a socialist, I don't think they should exist as they do. Like we shouldn't have billionaires, but while we do, we should definitely tax the crap out of them. I actually am also in favor of a marginal tax for sure. And so you get this argument. I think some libertarians they'll do like the quip of like, yeah, there should be a flat tax, it should be a zero, and it's like, oh, genius. But
yeah,
as far as people that actually are pro flat tax, talk to some people that have this, and there's a number of problems with I think the idea of a flat tax. The most simple one being, so let's say, just you think about it in like a smaller scale. If we live in a village and I make, say, I work for a week and I make $10 and you make $10 billion and we each have to pay 10%. I mean, there's also because there's the issue in economics of what's called marginal utility, like $10 to a homeless person. For one thing, it means a lot more to that person than it does to like Jeff Bezos. But
right,
also, it means a lot more. It's going to be cycled directly back into the economy. They're going to buy things they need to live. So there's this issue of what's called marginal utility, which is certain sums of money are more effective both to individuals and in broader economic systems when they're allocated a certain way. So
right,
you buying, like, for example, you buying something from Amazon, or you buying something from a small family business, the marginal utility is very different, even though it's the same amount of money on paper. So it's the same kind of concept with a flat tax, where there's taxing 10% of $1 billion and taxing 10% of $10. It's going to affect, like, it doesn't change any, if you're a billionaire, it doesn't change your lifestyle at all day to
yeah,
day if you get taxed 10%. Whereas if you make only $100, I mean, that could be like a meal for you. So obviously that's kind of an extreme example. I mean, very few people make like $100 a month or something, but
yeah,
and I'm not meaning this to be like a literal example in the United States. I'm just saying in general, the idea of having an only flat tax, what you end up with is people are still able to, you kind of have a lot of people in the bottom of the system that are sort of kind of staying afloat, whereas have people that if they're only paying 10%, I mean, they're able to amass crazy amounts of wealth, and they're not giving back, proportionately to what they get out of the system.
right,
And they're also, they're withholding wealth that could be used to affect greater social change. I think understanding marginal utility and also kind of how that would relate to a flat tax is,
yeah,
but people would say, well, we can just make it a big flat tax, like 50%. And that's a great idea for billionaires, but again, for people who are like living paycheck to paycheck, that could be horrible. So
yeah,
having a high flat tax could be disastrous, and having too low of a flat tax could be also disastrous. So, and there's not really like a middle ground where it's like, 28% is the ideal. Like, no, it should be marginal. It should be based on, again, marginal utility and how people's wealth is distributed. So I think obviously, billionaires should be taxed. I mean, Thomas Piketty is a French economist who said, he has this analysis. He has a book, Capital in the 21st Century, where he talks about how, wealth inequality is growing so exponentially, and it's going to continue to do so. And the only way to really curb it would be like a global 80% wealth tax. And a lot of socialists would be like, why not 100 on, the billionaires? But
Yeah.
It's obviously a radical proposal of like an 80% wealth tax, but I think the idea of, yeah, the wealthy need to be taxed a lot in order to kind of have some sort of balance come back out. And that's not to say, middle class people shouldn't pay any taxes. I mean, we all
Right.
should. We all should
Well,
contribute to the
yeah,
social
because
systems we're in.
one of the issues I found with, I mean, not to attack billionaires, but typically a lot of billionaires they'll have all this money in their bank accounts, but because it's not going out to society, then it's just kind of sitting there.
Right.
And because of that, that damages society overall. Because if you're not having that money kind of floating out there into the economy, well, that's going to be an issue, right?
Right, wealth hoarding. And it's it's
Yeah,
funny you brought up as well. It's a good point. I mean, you pretty much covered it, like the issue where people are like, well, that's just people are not gonna they're gonna just cheat their way out of paying
yeah,
taxes. It's like, well, for one thing, the one response to that is they already do like a lot. They'll, whether it be art appraisals or all kinds of wacky stuff they do. That's already happening. But yeah, so you don't want to view, when you're talking about like nationwide policy decisions, viewing them in a vacuum as like, oh, here's this policy, and then kind of like extrapolating from there is not like the correct way to think about how government works. So
right,
obviously, if you're going to impose a major increase on wealth taxes, along with that, there should be increased regulations and laws and surveillance of how their wealth is accumulated and moved. So, yeah, as you said, like close the loopholes. I mean, obviously, you're not going to be able to perfectly stop everybody from committing fraud, but there's nothing that's going to work out perfectly. But by and large, there are ways to more securely. And people also use the argument like, well, they're just going to move. And I'm always like, where? Every other industrial country in the world has a lot higher wealth taxes than we do. Like, sure, let them go. We'll be fine without them. They don't. As a result of the pandemic, the billionaires don't create the wealth, the workers do. That's why workers had to go
right.
into work during the middle of a virus. So, yeah. So I mean, a lot of the arguments against anybody who's like defending billionaires from like taxation is just really ridiculous. I don't get that at all. But
Yeah, because
yeah, it's
you also
ridiculous. But yeah.
mentioned how earlier you used to be a libertarian, and I don't know if you saw this, but I posted something about libertarianism on my Facebook, and I mentioned how the best argument against libertarianism is that it ignores the government's role in like how the economy works. So
Yeah,
typically,
that's a good point.
typically, what people will view government as a consumer like us, where we buy and sell things or make a profit, right? And that's just not how government works, right? Now, yes, it's true that government gets tax money, right? They tax us and they get money, but at the same time, they spend more they spend more than they get, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why they can do that is, well, because they're the creator of money. They're the ones that print out the money, get out to society. So governments don't actually make profit, right? They're the ones that like literally make the money from scratch, or I guess you
hmm
could say, increase the wealth. Now, of course, that'll increase, inflation. But
Right.
of course, I mean, any economic system is going to have some type of inflation. Typically, the ideal, I think it's like 1 or 2% each year, and that's the ideal
hmm
percentage you want inflation to be. But because of that, I mean, government being in debt is not really an issue, right? And I think this whole idea is what's called modern monetary theory. I don't know if you heard of it. Basically, the idea is that the best way to solve our economic problems is to have the government basically the government can never really run out of money, right? Now that may seem counterintuitive, right? Because you know we can run out of money, but the government's they're a different entity. Like the government is the one that creates the money, prints out the money, that sort of thing. So like in theory, the government could fund any program they want, right? If they really wanted to. Now, of course, there are limitations, right? Because you don't want to print out too much money, otherwise you're going to have hyperinflation.
Yeah.
But
And collapses.
overall, I think the government's role is important in that sort of way because if the government's able to print out that sort of money, then what we should really be focused on is not how much debt the government has. Rather, we should be more focused on how is that money that the government's spending being used to make the economy work, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's probably the best way to think of it, right? And that
hmm
this it's funny because once you apply that to economics, then that whole argument of taxation is theft, well, that doesn't work. Like that argument just completely falls
Yeah.
apart because the reason why government has to get taxes is so that it could, avoid that hyperinflation, right? So, what's your
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
yeah, that's all good stuff. I think well, you said like the best argument against libertarianism, and I was like, oh man, we could do a whole thing on just like which is the best one. I've thought about
Yeah,
this recently. I actually think, I don't. There was a philosopher, Andrew Chapman, who pointed this out to me on Facebook one time, and I've thought about it since then. I think libertarianism is probably at odds with any normative ethical system. I mean, consequentialism for obvious reasons, and virtue theory definitely, and I think even deontology. So I think libertarians don't talk too much about normative ethics because sometimes either they're not aware of it or they kind of realize that if you were to actually like systematically lay out what like our moral obligations are, or our moral duties, then it would kind of be at odds with a lot of how they think about society should function.
right.
Like think about like Tim Scanlon's like what we owe each other. I mean, libertarians tend to think we don't owe each other anything, which
Yeah,
is it's not a view taken seriously by anybody. So there, I think the best argument against libertarianism is just picking a side on normative ethics, any side, and you're gonna be there. But I think it's a good point too. I mean, there was people were posting about this recently. They're like, oh, the post office lost this much money in this year, and it's like it didn't lose money. It's a service that doesn't create profit, but it's a public
right.
service that's used as it's like a universal public service that's important. So it's not like it loses money in the sense like, oh, this is a vacuum, we should just get rid of it. Like, no, it's an essential service. It's not losing money. It just requires funds to function, and it
Right.
doesn't have a return. But that not everything has a return. And there are other issues like that too, like in terms of things like healthcare. I mean, Michael Sandel has this book called like What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of Markets, where he talks about like there's a lot of things that we don't want up to the market because we don't want them, um, made all about profit. There are certain things that are just at a moral level we should care about in and of themselves. But I think the point you raise is important too, just that also wealth isn't created in a vacuum. And Emerson and I talked about this too. Any of these corporations or even any person that makes money is doing it within a socioeconomic system that is
Right.
propped up by and it is created by the state. So the fact that they're even able to make this much money is because they're taking advantage of a service, if you want to call it that, or just a system
Right.
that is created and maintained by the government. And so Noam Chomsky's talked about this. Like people always want to talk about unregulated capitalism. Well, it's not even clear that capitalism could exist without a state to prop it up and to enforce things like private property rights, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, and I think what's also funny is how people always complain about the government debt, right? And
yeah,
I mean, but once you apply modern monetary theory, government debt isn't actually a problem anymore. Like, you know
yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean?
It's
Like,
not as much. And also, I mean, you look at the numbers. It's like we're never going to pay all that back. But that's not really the plan. It's
yeah,
um,
right,
it will probably collapse before we pay that. I
yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah, no, that's all good points. Is understanding how wealth is even created, and anything about what money even is. I mean, the government technically owns the money; they're the ones that make it, as you said. So,
yeah,
um, yeah, no, that's another good way to think about it. I mean, there's some ethics discussions to be had about the taxation theft argument as well. But just on the purely economic side, yeah, it doesn't really get off the ground, and that applies also to a lot of some of the stuff we've been talking about with flat taxes and being against government programs,
right.
on certain
Now,
theoretical grounds.
now before we go to the next issue, I just want your kind of perspective. So you would call yourself a socialist, right?
Yeah, for
Okay,
sure.
so now some people will be like, okay, well, you support totalitarianism, you want the government to control everything. What is socialism, just in a nutshell? Like,
Yeah, you get to a point of frustration where those people in yours like, fine.
yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot to say about this one. I've got a couple videos on this, and Emerson and I talked about it too. But the simple way to put it is socialism is just public when the capital good, so it's called the major means of production. So calling it private property is too vague because people don't really know what that means. They think we want to take your toothbrush, which is so the best way to put it is like capital goods, like things like factories or farm, huge farms like agricultural sites or capital, stocks in a corporate company, something like that. So when the capital goods in a society are publicly owned and controlled, so there's ownership and control element to it, which is in contrast to capitalism, where capital goods are privately owned and controlled. So when you talk about the definition of socialism, publicly owned and controlled is kind of broad. There are a lot of different. It's an umbrella term. There are technically the government owning it. If the government is democratic and works in a way that does service the public, then that can be socialism. But if it's too totalitarian, it's kind of iffy whether or not that is. Because I mean, if a totalitarian state has control of all the capital goods, but most of the people in the country have no say in how they're handled, whether or not that's public ownership and control anymore is sort of hard to say. I mean, if you define any government control as public, then fine, but not really. And most of so socialism, the bare bones definition is compatible with there being a state owning, but a good portion of the socialist tradition all throughout history since Kropotkin and Proudhon has been anarchist. So it doesn't fundamentally have anything to do with government control, and most socialists are, like myself, are explicitly anti-totalitarian, generally skeptical of governments, very anti-centralized authority. So I guess the bare bones root of it is, I mean, I guess socialism is, you can just say it's public ownership control of capital goods or major means of production. And I'm a democratic socialist, and I think socialism properly understood should be synonymous with some sort of commitment to democracy, but that's not in the bare bones. That's more complicated. Look at some other stuff for that. But essentially, the essence of my view, democratic socialism is having public institutions that are in service to the people that make them up. So they're completely democratic. They're organized from the bottom up instead of the top down. And this is how a lot of people think government should work, but then they don't think that's how the market should work. And I think democratic socialism is just an extension of a commitment to democracy from government into the economic sphere as well. So I think, corporations should be, and generally businesses should be run in a democratic way instead of a totalitarian way. And I think same applies to government. So democratic socialism, I think the best way to characterize it is just a universal, uncompromising commitment to democracy. And I think that's a simple way to put it too. And that's sort of the essence of, there's all the definitions, but if you read like a lot of socialist think tanks and a lot of the books written by socialists right now, like just think tanks like Current Affairs or Jacobin, and the people that write for those that have written books like Ben Burgess, Nathan Robinson, and Rob Larson, Bhaskar Sunkara, even if you read the more classics like Chomsky and Kropotkin, Conquest of Bread, I mean, there's the definitions, but then you kind of get, if you actually read a lot of the socialists, that the defining kind of this common thread is this kind of just uncompromising commitment to democratic structures as opposed to non-democratic ones.
Sounds interesting because it wouldn't be in line with either party, looks like.
Oh no, not at all. No, not even close. I mean, economically speaking, both Republicans and Democrats are just neoliberals. They're both pretty pro-corporation. They're definitely both pro-capitalist. They really don't divulge from each other all that much, if at all, when it comes to the economic domain. So socialists would definitely be opposed to socialists, or generally some socialists vote Democrat like me, because there are candidates like Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez. There are people who are closer to actually being socialists that are sort of are kind of slowly infiltrating the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party is it's more likely a vehicle for socialism to enter the public sphere. But as far as like ideologically lining up, I definitely I would have as many qualms almost with Joe Biden as I would with Trump on paper. I mean, not really. Yeah. I'd rather vote for Biden, but yeah, no, for sure. Socialists are very against both parties, at least, ideally. In an ideal world, we'd be against both equally well, and we'd hope there'd be like a third Democratic Socialist Party, which is a proposal people are talking about. But definitely against the kind of the options we have in electoral politics. As I said, I'm much more, and anybody who's actually socialist is significantly more left-wing than anything being talked about in the public sphere right now. So yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, I guess we can move on to immigration issues. Now, of course, my position is I would agree with most of what Trump does, except I guess a few things I want to point out that I wouldn't agree with him on. So I wouldn't agree with how he's handling. Like, I don't think you should lock people up in an institution for more than like 24 hours. I do think that illegals should have in-state intuition, especially if they're not criminals, right? But I also, as I said, I do support the border wall. I do support more border security, sanctuary cities. Probably reduce funding, but not total, because I mean, you got to be honest here. I mean, there's still citizens there, right? So you gotta you can't just like get rid of their federal funding, because I mean they're still citizens that you have to serve and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I guess you could say I'm more I hold the most of Trump's views on that, except I would differ on some like specific details with regards to that. I don't know what's your perspective on immigration.
Yeah, this is one. I talked about this recently somewhere else too, and it's one I've realized I've got to work some of my view out more on.
Yeah.
I think I definitely am against. I mean, obviously, the stuff we're doing right now at the border is horrible in terms of us as the United States, in terms of the report that came out recently of things like
Yeah.
forced hysterectomies, and they basically are concentration camps at this point. A while back,
Yeah.
there were people
Right.
that were a lot of. I remember months ago on Facebook, it might have even been a year ago when things were going on. Some of my leftist friends on Facebook were calling them concentration camps, and they was being ridiculed by conservatives online for calling. And then it was like
Yeah.
recently, everybody was like, "So do you apologize for ridicule? Because these are now they're concentration camps. We're separating children from parents for extended periods of
Yeah.
time. We're forced medical procedures. Like, what more do you need?" So, and there's generally a silence from the conservative presence online. There's a lot of they kind of they were very vocal.
I think
They've
the
never stopped
problem,
it.
well, here's the thing is I think a lot of conservatives, especially coming from my own perspective, is they'll agree with Trump on like, yes, we should have a border wall, we should have increased border security, but then when it comes to like what happens to those that do go through, um, that's where it becomes where you have to take the liberal position. Like that's when you can't take the conservative position on that. Like once they pass, then you have to take
Well, yeah, their position would
more.
probably just be like deportation or something. I don't even know what
Yeah,
their
yeah.
um.
So
But I mean,
yeah,
all that to say, I mean, there was not much of a conservative outrage at the a lot of the right wing Christians on Facebook were not posting much at all about the forced hysterectomies at the borders. That was all my left wing friends, and they post about dumb shit, but not actually moral issues. I think mostly they're just posers, but that's a separate issue. In the case of that, I mean, I don't see a need for a border wall in the sense that it's unnecessary in terms of it. Costs a lot of money and labor to create it, and a lot of immigration happens through like air and sea already. I think even more so than on the land. And as far as like, I mean, there's a purely again the cost benefit analysis side of things. It does cost a lot of money to maintain concentration camps and have ICE agents at borders and like maintain all. So there is a cost to preventing immigration. And as far as weighing that against the cost of allowing it, I'm not sure what the exact numbers on that are, but it is important to point out that it costs money to have ICE agents at borders, and especially for building walls, for building more camps, fences, etc. That all costs money, money that it might be better used to, help these people. I guess maybe it's a case by case thing with me as well, but I also understand that a lot of the refugees from Latin America, are in such bad situations because of years of American intervention in Latin America. So we've sort of caused a lot of
right,
the problems we're now reaping the consequences for. Same with, a lot of European refugees. I mean, we've had Western presence in the Middle East, violent Western presence in the Middle East for decades, and we're kind of experiencing some of the fallout of that. And it's not their fault that we fucked with their countries for decades.
right.
And that's true in Latin America as well in terms of sanctions on places like Venezuela and Cuba, and Reagan's invasions there that killed like 20,000 people in the case of Cuba. So I do. There's a part of me that just like wants to say, yeah, we kind of owe these people something because we sort of caused their predicament. I don't have a super worked out view on immigration. I mean, I guess at a moral level, and there's also a kind of this desire I have to just want to say things like, well, borders are fake anyways. Countries are fake.
Yeah,
Borders
right.
are just imaginary lines we've drawn. So like preventing people from crossing one because they need help is sort of morally ridiculous. So
Mhm.
there's part of me that's like, people need help, people are in need, and you should provide that. And again, it's not like we don't have the money to do that. Our half of our military budget could not, it wouldn't even, I mean, that's too much of a number. It wouldn't even need that much. I mean, so if we chose to allocate resources a different way, we could help people more. And part of me thinks we should. I don't really see any reason to restrict it heavily. I definitely don't think we should have completely closed borders. I mean, maybe I'm okay with, again, I'm sort of undecided on this. I mean, maybe I'm okay with vetting where we kind of have at least like we do it gradually, so we don't have like an economic too much of like a shell shock. Um,
Right.
but I think if it's done properly, there's not really any reason to be like strongly against it in terms of immigration, like allowing lots of immigration. I mean, that's sort of how, the country got started back in the day, was, allowing a lot of immigrations from Italian countries and entering the workforce. So, yeah, I think, again, it's only the more morally interesting case with it is with how we handle it, in the sense of, I definitely think it's wrong the way we're handling things at the border now. And I think it's morally wrong to withhold aid from people who need it. So if it's a case by case thing where people need help and we're not giving it simply because we say it's going to cost us too much, and I think that's wrong. And I think a lot of that, what people talk about, there was Trump spreading the conspiracy theory about illegals voting for Hillary, and that was not true. I mean, there was never any evidence of that. People still use that as an argument sometimes, and it's a conspiracy theory and it's ridiculous. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've not really described a coherent. I don't have like a one-word, like coherent description, summary here of my, policy on borders. I guess I'm generally, my left-wing concern for, kind of righting wrongs that are sort of our fault in the world and helping people who need it, as long as it's feasible and there are ways we can do it without being morally worse than we already are. I mean, yeah, I guess I just don't see any reason to have closed borders. And, it might even save us money in the long term in terms of how much it costs to maintain. But I also think addressing, because Bernie Sanders talked about this a little bit, I think I'm always a big fan of looking at, like, helping immigrants. It's like a Band-Aid, right? If they keep flooding in, it's because there's some systemic problem farther back in this causal chain. And whether or not we entirely caused it or partially did, maybe we didn't at all, we still maybe have some moral obligation to help, help seal or heal the root cause. Like we talked about this, like with abortion, like a lot of times when these issues, like we're dealing with symptoms a lot in politics. And if we would, instead of talking only about the symptoms, looked at what's causing it, like, okay, a lot of these people are immigrating. Why are they coming from this place? What's bad about here? And how can we help fix it so that they don't have to leave their countries? They can, they can help, they can live in prosperity and harmony where they can, instead of having people always like, well, America, we don't run from our countries, we fix it. And it's like, well, yours isn't as systemically horrible for you, because it's middle-class white people saying that things aren't bad for you here. And so of course you're going to say that you wouldn't leave your country. There's no reason for you to. So I think understanding that a lot of times we're looking at symptoms and we need to look at causes as opposed to just the effects. Like, sure, we do need to help with the effects, but also, like, if we can stop it from happening by, righting some wrong in the world, that's the best way to handle it, I think. I don't know exactly what that would look like. I don't know the specifics of all the causes of immigration all over the world. And obviously it's unrealistic to think we can fix every problem globally. That's unrealistic, but I think we should at least be looking for causes and how to maybe help them.
Yeah, because I actually, so there's an old video, I forgot what his name was, but he compares world populations with like gumballs. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's pretty hilarious.
I don't think so.
But he shows how, so most people, I might have to send it to you. I'll try to find it and then send it to you.
Yeah, so you can find it.
So you can watch it later. But basically, so what he did was he compared world populations, and then he put like all of first world, like third world countries, like people that are living in poverty, in like one jar, and in first world another jar, right? And the majority of people were in the first jar, which is, most people on this planet, unfortunately, are poor. Like, I mean, that's just reality. Yep. Right? And what he points out that we can't solve that problem by immigration, right? So the only way to really solve that problem is to go into their countries and actually help those countries. And I think that's the best way to actually reduce immigration, right? Or at least reduce, illegal immigration, because if we can help those countries out, well, then we can make it. Not only are we going to, solve the immigration problem, we're also going to solve much larger problems within the world. And I think that's a good way to approach it. So
that's definitely good too, because you think about, like, we just don't have enough space in the world to like accommodate the entirety of like 7 billion people in just the United States or just in Europe, right? Like we have a lot of land mass. It'd be better to use it, spread the populations out, because there's other reasons why it's not good to have super high concentrations of population. So if we're able to solve the root problem, that's what we should definitely do. So yeah, that's a good if you can find that, send it to me. That sounds interesting. I mean, I definitely agree with the kind of the gist of that, right? We should, if possible, we definitely got to just solve the actual problems and not just be constantly putting on Band-Aids. That's not sustainable for anybody and doesn't help people, because some people aren't able to leave, places where they're bad if they're like sick or
Well, yeah,
injured or have,
that's what he points out, that most of those people can't leave their countries, right? So yeah.
They just have to suffer. Yeah, and it'd be better to, have a globally morally better solution. So yeah, for sure. Sounds good to me.
All right. Well, I'm not gonna. I guess we can skip electoral issues because I'm sure we'd probably agree to that anyways. You know, arrest criminal politicians, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's easy enough, right?
Education issues. Now, I guess we can just briefly talk about this. So that would have to do with student loans. Now, I know you would probably be more. You want college to be free. I would probably agree to that. At least the first 2 years should be free, but then the student loans should be so no interest rates, right? I don't know, because I think that's probably like the biggest reason why people get into student loans and why they can't pay it off is because these interest rates. And I just say, okay, let's just get rid of the interest rates. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
For sure.
So I think we agree to that. And then environmental issues. So we'll probably get to that as well. I do believe in climate change. I do think that humans are causing it. So I'm not sure. Yeah, we probably agree to that anyway. So I'm not gonna. I mean, you believe in climate change, right?
Yeah, that'd be weird. That'd be a funny turn if I was like, wait, climate, that's not real. And yeah, no, that's a big one, because that's probably the biggest threat to, like, life on Earth as it is. So
right. So yeah, I would agree to climate change. I would probably, again, I would support nuclear energy. Of course, I mean, here's the thing: is it's funny because so conservatives will attack liberals because they're like against nuclear power, but I guess the Democratic Party, they changed their position on nuclear power, which is good. So I think
yeah, recently they did that. At least some of them did, which is good, because they have that was one of my very few qualms. I mean, I don't have many issues with Bernie Sanders, but he was, I think, as part of his platform was like anti-nuclear, at least nuclear skeptical, and that was one thing I was like, come on, because definitely pro-nuclear.
So again, we'll probably get to that. And then criminal issues. Okay, so that one's interesting. I don't know if you watched my video, but I spent like the last part of it talking about just that. And I think
really?
the whole criminal system, prisons, they need to be changed, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I think we need to look at either Sweden or Norway, look at their prison systems and see basically that retribution, it doesn't work. Putting people in cages all day isn't going to help them. It isn't going to change their ways. In fact, it'll probably make them worse, right? Because when you put a bunch of bad people together, well, it's gonna.
Yeah, not a great.
So I don't know. My position is basically that the whole prison system just needs to be changed. What do you think?
I agree. I mean, we talked about this a little bit with drugs too, and part of it's not a vacuum thing. I mean, the prison system needs to be changed, but also the criminal justice system. So, and that would, even just changing just one would help the other a lot. So, changing criminalization standards on drugs would help. We'd have less overcrowded prisons because you wouldn't have people, incarcerated for marijuana possession,
Right.
and that would help a lot. And I definitely am against like the labor, like basically the slavery, the loophole in the 13th Amendment where, slavery is illegal unless they're prisoners, then they can be slaves. And I'm definitely against that. So I definitely think it should be reformed completely. I mean, for one thing, what counts as something that's a incarcerating offense needs to be changed. But also, yeah, I'm definitely a fan of the countries that do very much so rehabilitative prison systems, like where the prisons are generally pretty nice. They, even have sometimes animals they let them adopt, and they usually the perfect. It's also, it's kind of a thing of a social ethos, what do you think when you talk about things like prisons and a lot of issues like this, you have to ask what is this institution for? And if you view it, and if your social ethos is saying this institution is for just punishing people, and then or if your social ethos says this is for helping people who have made some mistakes turn their lives around. It's a radically different way to view an institution and people and how they are valued. So I definitely think I would prefer having obviously if you a mass murderer or something, you can have, obviously don't give them a cushy room and let them out in 6 months. I mean, I can see that straw man coming already. So just get out in front of that. But I definitely think, like, we should look at what it is we think prisons should be for, and when we view them the right way, it should, these ideally should be people basically the same way, like, people who are in as drug addicts, like if they get arrested because they're, publicly intoxicated or overdosed, like having them go to like get mental like therapy or mental health help, as opposed to, or people with mental health issues that end up in prisons, giving them mental health advice and help
Right.
and rehabilitation instead of just sticking them in a cage for years. So yeah, I definitely think the whole thing needs to be basically torn down and rebuilt. I mean, it's kind of like
Yeah.
just like amending a few things here and there is not going to fix it. I mean, we need to change the criminal justice system, but also how we, for one, I mean, the first step to any sort of social change is changing how people think. So when you get people to think about other people as deserving of second chances and rehabilitation as opposed to just deserving of punishment, then it becomes an easier sell to make, to be like, prison should be to help people. Uh, because then, it also helps society in general, as opposed to paying taxes to keep all these people in cages. If you can instead pay a little bit of money to help get people back on their feet and back into being productive members and giving back to the social systems they're in, then it's going to be better for everybody involved. And there's
Right.
no negatives to it. So yeah, why not change the prison system? There's no reason to keep it how it is. In fact, there are a lot of reasons to change it. It's pretty messed up.
All right. And then I think we agree to everything else, which is science issues, national security, foreign policy. Again, I mentioned this briefly in my video that I haven't looked too much into that, so I couldn't really comment on foreign policy anyways. So yeah, I mean, again, that's not really a political issue for at least not right now. Like, it's not really a big topic, um, but yeah, so.
Which is weird. I mean, it should be.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's one of those things we sort of ignore, like how bad our foreign policy is. Yeah, I definitely think definitely non-interventionist. I mean, yeah, our foreign policy. I mean, we got bases all over the world. We're still, occupying places, even some places like Okinawa, where the country never really consented to us being there, but we're just there. Actually, I had a buddy who was stationed in Okinawa for a while, and I was like, I remember reading a book where it was like, yeah, we're not even supposed to be there, and I was like, oh, my friend's there.
Yeah.
So yeah, military bases all over the world, still intervention, still, thousands of bombs being dropped in the Middle East every year, just all kinds of civilian casualties. I mean, there's a report that came out a while ago, I saw earlier this year, about how U.S. forces have killed more civilians than like Afghanistani terrorists have in like the past year. So as far as our foreign policy, I definitely think we should. I mean, part of the reason our military spending is so bad is because we're intervening in all these
Yeah.
countries that we don't need to be intervening in. And again, a lot of it is we're carrying out military coups, or there's destabilization because of what we've done in the past. So I think foreign policy should be talked about more, because basically almost everything we've done since World War II in terms of foreign policy has been really wrong. And we don't talk about it enough, because America just has this rosy view of itself as some sort of global liberator, when it's actually one of the worst globally terrorist regimes in the history of the world. So, yeah, that's, to put it mildly.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
So
All
we
right.
don't have to go
Well.
too deep into that, yeah. But
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
basically we should be. I guess that's the thing, is just to say we should be looking at how we handle global military intervention, and we should be more aware of how we've done that historically and how we're doing it now, and maybe how we should change it. That's one that people just need to be more aware of.
Right. All right. Well, we're actually went kind of over time, but that's fine, I guess.
Yeah,
So yeah,
it's
I
about
really like
perfect.
this discussion, especially like right now, politics is like, it's really bad.
Yeah,
People can't have civil conversations about these sort of issues, and I found it really helpful how we were able to have civil conversations despite, I'm more conservative, you're more liberal, but at the end of the day, we kind of both agreed to a lot of things. Like, when you actually
yeah,
sit down and have a conversation with somebody about these topics, there's actually a lot of common, right? That both sides can kind of agree on, and I found that very helpful. And I think that's how. Unfortunately, I know right now that's not how politics is going, right? Because people
yeah,
are
for
just so
not exactly.
divisive. But I hope that this video can kind of help and show people like, hey, like, two people on like different sides of the political spectrum can have agreements to a lot of issues, right?
Yeah, and
Um,
just have civil conversations are still possible, right?
right.
That's something we just need to see after all, like the debates and stuff, especially if the presidential one. It's like there's still, good conversations to be had with rational people about this stuff. So yeah, it definitely is valuable to do. And we'll be debating. We'll get a 1-2 punch. I guess next month is when we'll be talking about God, and that'll be good to be like, well, atheists, Christians, conservatives, liberals, we can all be friends. At the end of the day, we can all talk about stuff at least.
Yeah.
It's been really fun. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's good to be here. I hope your viewers are not too mad at my SJW soy boy
Yeah.
tendencies. But yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been good to chat.
All right. Later.